I grew up in Fond du Lac, about 12 miles from here, and I graduated from St. Joseph Catholic School. We had a pastor that was very conscious about vocations. In the course of time, we had about 14 priests in a 16-year period. And he had gone to Calvary, and he knew about Calvary. So as a server, I came up here a long time ago for a service picnic. And then I can remember driving around the countryside with my dad, my brother and me. He was kind of a salesman. I remember driving along one of the hills over there. And as you come over the hill, Calvary comes into view. And I said to my dad, "What is that?" And he said, "That's a seminary where young boys study for their priests." And I said, "Wow," never realizing that someday I'd be going there. So I came here at Calvary, graduated, and the year that I graduated from the second year college that they had then, my kid brother graduated from high school, and he went to the Capuchins. I wanted to be a diocesan priest, so I went to St. Francis Seminary. But you know, so many of my classmates had gone to the Capuchins when we graduated from high school. I had thought about it, but then put it aside. But after he went to the novitiate and I went to the seminary, we began with an 8-day retreat at the seminary. And after that 8-day retreat, I went into Milwaukee with a fellow who had gone to Calvary, an older guy, who was looking for drapes for his room. We went in and out of department stores, and by the time I got back to the seminary and we went into the chapel for night prayers, I was so sick and tired of running around that I really felt a call to something deeper, and it was unmistakably to the Capuchins. Now, that surprised me, and I struggled with it. I struggled with it the whole year, and I saw the chaplain there every once in a while to tell him about it. By the end of the year, I figured I had to go to find out. So I made an appointment with the spiritual director, knocked at his door. He opened it, and he said, "Well, how's the Capuchin Franciscan?" I said, "What? How did you know?" He said, "It's written all over your face." So I never had a doubt after I went to the order then, after that. And the novitiate was so very pleasant. In fact, Father Solanus Casey was there in novitiate when I was there. So I had a chance to talk with him once in a while, always be with him at prayers, meet him as I was cleaning, our chores and things, see his devotion to another priest named Father Damasus, who was blind. He would help Damasus with office because Damasus couldn't. He just remembered the Psalms from memory, or he'd help Damasus eat with his food, cut it up and stuff like that. It was very impressive for that. So that was my first year in the order, the profession, and I've never had a doubt about it ever since. My maiden name is Jerry, but I took the part of St. Anthony in a play here at Calvary, and it really impressed me. I never forgot that, wearing the habit and taking the part of Anthony. So when I did feel this call to the order, and in those days you changed your name to signify you were beginning a whole new life. So I chose Anthony right away, and I never went back to that. When we had the choice to go back to our baptism names, so many people knew me, my Anthony only, that I kept that. So, and I've never regretted it. Great patron. I went through the regular training. I had what in those days our province was united with what is now the New York province. So I studied out there for 2 years, and then our province divided, and we came back to the Midwest, and I went to Marathon to study theology there. And after I was ordained a priest and we finished, they wanted more formal training in preaching and public speaking and things for the friars. For the friars who were teaching us were just teaching us from their own experience. So another friar and I were appointed to go to Marquette University and get masters in speech from there. So that's what I did it was during the summer for a couple of years, then for a full year to get the masters, do the testing and all that. And then after that, I was assigned to Marathon, And at Marathon, the Knights of Columbus wanted a Catholic television program because there was a Saturday night program called the Church of Speak or something. But the Catholics didn't participate, and sometimes there were misunderstandings about what Catholics believed. So the Knights of Columbus asked our theology professor if he would be the speaker on a 15-minute program, live program, Friday nights, right after the news. And I offered to help him because in my studies for master's, television was one of the things we did. So it began that way. We began live Friday nights. We had the idiot, they used to call them the idiot cards. You'd have cues that were held right aside of the camera. And so we would practice that, then go and do it live. It became popular enough that Knights wanted to put it on every television station in Wisconsin. But we traveled to Green Bay and did it just before the Packers game. But we couldn't travel to 6 or 7 other places. So the Knights said, we got to put it on film. And I didn't have any training in motion picture production. But one day out of the blue, I got a notice from New York University. This was on a Thursday, a postcard that an 8-week program in film production would begin the following Monday. So, whoa, I got on the phone to get permissions to go. You had to do all those things beforehand. Did that. Got on the plane Saturday night. I flew into New York late and began this 8-week film program that was just what I needed. And when I came back to Wisconsin, we learned that there was a priest who had been doing some television programs and had the lights and the 16-millimeter camera for it. So we bought that equipment from him, and I had enough production experience to design a set in our seminary ground. We had to do it in a little hall we had, and it had a stage. And I made a very simple design in the back. But we had to do it when the other friars were in the chapel praying, because if they were even walking around on that creaky floor they would pick up all that noise. But over television, we weren't using him so much for catechesis at that time. What happened was the Franciscans in California had a radio program called The Hour of St. Francis. Then they began to develop a television program, and they did a whole series. And they were selling them to the armed forces, and the armed forces wanted more, so they began producing a short a series of stories. They were 15-minute stories rather than just talking heads as we had been doing. And they became very popular. They needed some help. When we formed a group of Franciscans in communications to help each other. So when they learned of me and I learned of them, they offered me a job out there. So I was teaching up in Marathon when the seminary was going to move down to Milwaukee. And I had a choice of going down to Milwaukee or to go out to California. That didn't take a 30-day retreat. So that summer, then, after I finished a number of things up in Marathon, we went out to Los Angeles. I got there on the middle, I remember, I think it was August 15th. So next day, I had a camera in my hand. I was out in the streets because they were doing some spots. They were known for their telespots, they call them, short 1-minute stories on radio, on television, and then adaptations on radio. We were out in the streets making spots for the Campaign for Human Development, a program that the bishops had begun to help the poor help themselves. So that got me right into things, and I got into so much production there, gradually became the president of director of production. And then when the president, a former Franciscan, wanted to marry and leave the order, then he stayed as executive vice president, and I stayed on as president there for over 25 years. Wonderful experience. Yeah, that's right. We had access to writers, actors, directors, and things like that that were just great. Hard to duplicate anyplace else. I had the chance to go back to California after my term was over. And at that time, the Archdiocese was looking for somebody because they had a gold mine in airwaves that were bought for educational broadcasting. Those airwaves could be digitized and they needed only 5 channels. They could rent, in a sense, or sell the rest of the space to like the Pacific Telecommunications. So they were looking for somebody to program some of those things. Well, I had a job then with the Archdiocese. Although that thing didn't work out, I got to be involved in a lot of the programs with the Archdiocese, working in pastoral telecommunications. I worked there in pastoral telecommunications. And in the course of that, I worked in a parish where the director of the president of the Directors Guild and his wife, who was a writer, belonged to a parish where I was helping. So we got together and thought it would be good to have, if we could establish an organization for Catholics in media, and that's what we call it, Catholics in Media. We sponsored an annual program, a mass at like the Beverly Hilton there, and then after that, a big breakfast or brunch, and we gave awards to outstanding productions and that represented the best in human values on television. Yeah, great time. I don't have much of an ministry in education now that I'm retired. I live at a boys' high school and I help out there with things. But other than that, because I'm retired, I don't get involved that much anymore in the media, etc. We still have the Catholics in Media organization, and I help with that once in a while, retreats, things like that. But that's about the limit of my media involvement right now. Well, I never ordered my life according to management objectives. Rather than plan out things, what I did in most of my life was respond to things that were offered to me. And in doing that, I discovered sometimes that I did things I didn't know I could do. And I got into different positions, different activities, different organizations. Formed a couple organizations of Franciscans in communications when I became aware that I could organize and run big meetings and things like that. So I'd run the chapters here for the province a couple of times, and some of the other meetings out in Los Angeles for the Archdiocese. So I guess if there was anything that I've learned from those years, it was that when the challenge comes to respond, if I don't have a real good reason for saying no, I'll say yes. And because of that, some wonderful things have happened that probably we would never had otherwise.